Thank you very much indeed for coming today. We have, I think, a really interesting program, and we're trying to avoid having too much of formal presentations. We have done a few formal presentations on this campus and indeed around Australia talking about, talking about the project and going through a whole bunch of stuff. But I will spend 20 minutes going through some slides that you have in your pack, talking a little bit about the project and trying to highlight some key findings rather than to focus on the more academic aspects of the project and the process. So let's go through this fairly quickly so that we can get to the first panel. The other preliminary thing I wanted to say is Debbie kindly read out the funding partners, 9 of them, but in fact there's 12 other departments around Australia that helped us very much with this project. I won't read them out now, but some of the people on the panel are in fact from other departments that didn't necessarily fund the project but facilitated it by allowing access and allowing their staff to participate in surveys and interviews. So we're extremely grateful to 21 agencies around Australia, and not just the people who gave us money, which was, of course, especially valued. So let's have a look. So I remember finding this slide 10 years ago, and I think it's one of the best things around. A lot of you probably use it yourself in your talks. It's kind of like, here we are, the academics, putting stuff out there, selling our message, but who's listening? And it's a great visual for the dilemma of people who take scientific expertise seriously and are trying to do some thorough work which they think should be appreciated and should be noticed and should be influential directly or indirectly, and that's really what motivated our project. Basically to map, I'll skip a couple of these, to map where the policy landscape sits and where the social science landscape sits, to what extent they intersect, where are the areas that we have good relationships to promote a good interchange of information and opportunities, where are the areas where we do a bad job, and what have we learned from experience on what to do. This is just a little diagram saying that we can't expect the policy iceberg and the university iceberg to have close and intimate relationships. The institutional logic of the political system, the scientific system and the professional and managerial systems are different. They will never coincide, but the challenge is to get some fruitful overlap between the people who run the policy, political policy system, the political judgment people who do the scientific work like us, and of course some practitioners here today, and the professional and managerial groups who run programs, who manage organisations. We have to somehow get those to line up a little better. So in the information pack you have, we have a lot of information about how we went about doing the project. I don't want to rehearse that too much, but essentially we investigated what are the conditions and circumstances that hinder or support the use of social science research in the real world of public sector departments. And we did quite a lot of work about conceptualising what those relationships might look like, doing quite a lot of attitudinal work from both sides of the fence, the academics and the practitioners, on how that works at the present time, what seems to work well, what seems to work badly, and what are the kinds of expertise that public servants rely on in their work that they hope and expect will be of value to other people. So you have these slides in your pack. I won't go through them, but we basically did 2 major surveys and we did 2 very large batches of interviews, and we're basically 3/4 of the way through the analysis. We hope to do some more work on the interviews in particular over the next coming months. The structure of today is that after I give a few more minutes of overview, we move into 3 panels. We have some distinguished academic and practitioner people sitting out the front for the panels. They're under strict instructions to have some short, punchy messages and observations. And as soon as they're finished, we'll move into general discussion. And I know some of you are keen to make some observations both on what you hear from the panel, but also based on your own experience about what works and what we can do better. So I'll come to the panels in a moment. So panel 1 is about research partnerships. We've divided this up on the basis of what we think are some of the key themes, issues and dimensions of this problem. So we've set up the panels to deal with what we take to be some fundamental underlying issues. And the panel that we'll get to very soon is about research partnerships, which is to say, how do the practitioners in the public sector relate to and work with practitioners in the academic social science sector? And there's a lot of partnering and relationship stuff that goes on. What do we know about it and how can we do it better? One way of talking about that is the utilisation framework. The utilisation literature talks about what are the ways in which and the extent to which social research findings are taken up or could be taken up by practitioners who are working in a similar kind of field of work. And some of what we've done is to try and contrast perceptions from both sides of the fence. So, for example, where we asked both the academics and our public servants in the policy areas, what are in fact the priorities of end users here being the practitioners. And I won't go through this, we don't have time, but there are some interesting differences. The one at the bottom is particularly interesting. The practitioners thought that the high scientific quality would be a major issue for them in terms of the acceptability of the research. The academics put in a much lower number, and we put this down to cynicism. We put it down to a view that practitioners are hard-boiled practical people who are under the thumb of their political masters, and so messages which are discordant with the government of the day are of not much interest, no matter how high their scientific quality. So the numbers that came up high for the academics were certainly about relevance, certainly about timeliness and communication skills and so on, but some cynicism about whether science would carry the day. From the point of view of the public servants, I think this data is extremely interesting. I don't think anyone's done this kind of analysis before. But we found that taking the 21 departments as a group, we found that public servants were saying that if we look at what are the determinants and contexts for policy advice, budget is massively important, politically acceptable or alignment with the government of the day is enormously important. Some perceptions about the urgent and immediate being more significant than the long-term kinds of policy development issues, and so on. And then some things about what's the organisational culture, to what extent research is in fact valued and used, and so on and so on. And the one at the bottom, a perception of crisis and response to what's on the front page of the newspaper as a major driver of giving policy advice. Interestingly, the media didn't come up quite as highly as we thought it might. Very quickly, we're talking in the first session about research collaborations and partnerships and relationships. The academics thought that there were some difficulties in doing that well. Debbie Terry mentioned some of them before, the fact that we slant our promotions criteria towards very formal issues of research quality and productivity, we don't tend to value relationship building with third parties, and that needs to change. So the academics who responded to our surveys certainly had that kind of view. They don't have the time to invest in these things because other things are more important. There are different research orientations, complexity of contracting is a problem, so on and so on. And for the standard academic, particularly the early career researchers who are trying to find their way and get promoted through the system, it's actually a pretty tough gig. They need to work out how are they going to get down that road to be successful when there are all these obstacles and people out there to make life hard for them to get a paper accepted. And that's seen as the obstacle course. How many papers can you get through? It's like a horrible game of rugby with baseball bats. What Debbie was saying is maybe we need to broaden the criteria for the game we're playing here. We need to make it clear that doing work that is valued by third parties is actually important, but how do we build that in? Very quickly, barriers to research translation. The academic reward system works in the other direction. The requirement to publish in certain kinds of journals works in the other direction. The high costs of time and resources and so on. I'll leave you to have a look at that at your leisure. The policymakers do in fact mirror some of this. Not surprisingly, the policymakers and public servants have a view that academics are indeed caught in this web of difficulties, that they find it difficult to spend time learning about the interests and activities and priorities of the public service or of the policy-making process. They're more interested in publishing in journals than addressing our problems. They don't make enough effort to disseminate their work in forms that would be highly acceptable to third parties, and they're poor at communication and all the rest of it. So we did some work on asking public servants, well, if academics aren't the end-all, the be-all and end-all of your expertise sources, who else do you look at? We have some interesting data, which we're split here between state and federal. Most of it aligns fairly closely, but we're looking to explore reasons for difference here. Internal agency staff are, or colleagues if you like, work colleagues are the first source of expertise for public servants, and this is entirely to be expected. As you go down the list, university researchers are valued at the 70th percentile there. Interestingly, valued above interest groups and private consultants. We were chuffed about that. But on the other hand, academics aren't regarded as the public servant's best friend or first port of call. And in further exploration of this, we found that the most common form of accessing information was the internet, that Professor Google is the most valued colleague of public servants. This is, I suppose, not overly surprising. The policymakers believe that research on the whole is highly competent, that results are from time to time seen as useful to some degree in the policy-making process, that completing projects on time and on budget is moderately okay, not spectacular, and so on. So there's some grumbles about the kind of work that they receive. And quite a few of the policy-related people said, yeah, I'm familiar with academic work. I occasionally cite or refer to academic work in some of the things I produce. But the numbers are pretty low in regard to seeing this as a central part of their activity, or particularly in suggesting that there's some direct relationship between research findings and policy change. The last one there, 16% thought there were examples of direct influence of some kind. And the barriers from the point of view of public servants, very quickly, again, are quite interesting. Time pressures, which was on a previous slide, little opportunities to build relationships, which is the subject of our first panel in a moment. We looked at organisational capacity of departments to actually explore and play with research findings, how much effort they put into it. Do they do any research translation? Do they do internal research dissemination? And about a third of our respondents said that they there was no evidence that their agencies did any of that, which I guess is room for improvement. Okay, so very quickly, the last couple of slides. At the end of the day, in our third panel, we want to talk about, well, what's the future? How do we generate better research impacts? The current perceptions of research impact, I don't know whether you regard this as surprisingly strong or surprisingly poor, depending on where you sit on this. The academics were much more sanguine and optimistic. They thought, on the whole, their numbers are typically higher, except for the last one. More than half the academics, and we're talking here about very senior, successful, published academics who have done work with other organisations. More than half of them thought that academic research is used to shape and inform policies. Policymakers more sceptical. That academic research does alter and transform how policymakers think about things, again much more sanguine, and so on and so on. So where do we get to? We certainly confirm that the institutional logic and experience in these different sectors is quite distinctive and different. There is quite a lot of scepticism in the public service about the direct value of social science, but there are, we would call them hotspots, where the linkages are quite dynamic, where the relationships are well oiled and valued on both sides. Our hope is that we can learn quite a lot from those sorts of experiences of where things seem to work well, where there's an alignment of interests and both sides willing to put in the time and effort to make things work as well as expected. But we're not utopians here. We don't believe that research will ever drive the policy process in a general sense. But what we are aiming for is to crank it up and make it rather better than it is. It's very patchy. There's a lot to be done on both sides of this bridge in terms of the academics becoming much more aware of the challenges and much more aware of the needs of public servants for particular kinds of advice and material, and an educative challenge for the academics to make the public servants much more aware of what their needs are, what's the best fit, what are the best opportunities and moments for introducing their expertise into the process. So I'll leave it there.